Well, welcome, folks. We wanted to get together today and talk about some of the things that have really been coming to light with the work that we're doing with our clients. And it's so important to talk about some of these things. And some of them are really tough topics, quite frankly. And we're going to weave in how mindfulness works and how we address these things and some of the things that are really emerging with the work in the work that we're doing with our clients. It's a whole different set of things that are popping up, and everybody's talking about this new normal, and the reality is, what can we do to help create what this new normal will be, and how do you deal with these shifting sands? And from a leadership standpoint, it runs the gamut from doing everything virtually to some of the really dire things in terms of employees passing on or getting sick, and just all these different things that we have found in our work that the leaders are just uh, they're having a tough time. There's no doubt about it, and that's what we're here to do, is help them and hopefully help you today as we talk about some of these things. So Matt and I are going to kick some of these things
Mhm.
around and just share some of the things that we have learned over the last few weeks in particular, and hopefully shed some light on some of those and give you some options in terms of what you can do about it. So Matt, where are we
Yep.
going to go
Yeah.
first? What topic?
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So let's just move through these questions and let's and statements or thoughts, if you will, and we'll just start with the first is a question, and it's how to lead through fear. So how do we as leaders in this uncertain time, how do we lead through this? And do you want to kick it off, Drayton, and give us your
Yeah,
thoughts first?
it's so interesting in the conversations we're having with folks now. We hit things head on. We tell people that we kind of have this velvet whip that we address things with, and we do it with love and kindness, certainly. But we ask them right up front, how are they doing with the whole fear piece? And what we have found is that a lot of these leaders are taking it on, and it's kind of like that Coke bottle, right? You keep pushing things down, you pushing things down, and something's going to explode because it's full of the CO2, and it's just. And we're finding that a lot of these folks are just taking their fear as leaders and just stuffing it down, and they think they have to show up from this place of service, that it's all about taking care of their people, which is wonderful. And certainly that's a huge part of our duty and responsibility as leaders to do so. And the reality is, every single leader that we're talking to is afraid. They're afraid of this, from everything. It runs the gamut. They're afraid for their families. They're afraid for
Mm-hmm.
their own health. They're afraid for all of their peers. They're afraid for the existence of the organization. They're afraid for, of the fact that will we get back to the way things used to be? And so we help them work through this fear. And the first thing that needs to happen is owning it. And we get them to spend some time thinking about it. And, we talk about quiet time and meditation, etc. And we get them to spend time addressing it head on. One of the things we
Mm-hmm.
did, Matt, you'll recall in the webinar we did just last week, we help people bring in the fear. Like when it comes up, we don't avoid it. We don't do, this, oh, I'll deal with that later, or, ooh, I don't want to think about that. I'm going to be super optimistic and not talk about being fearful. And we teach people through mindfulness and deep breathing to let that fear come in
Mm-hmm.
and experience it in your body. And when you do that, you disarm it. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's not the first time you do it that this happens, but it takes its iterations. And
Mm-hmm.
over time, as you address the fear, quote unquote, head on, and you let it into your experience, you will find that the power is diminished. And so that's one of the first things that we help folks with, is just for the leader, and this, we're talking personal leadership. This is not just leaders of organizations. This is personal leadership. Help
Mm-hmm.
them to deal with their own fear. And part of that is owning up to their teams and their families and their friends that they're afraid. You know, the old days of this militaristic hierarchy in an organization where everybody's supposed to be 10 feet tall and bulletproof, it doesn't cut it nowadays. So the reality is, you know, we need to come clean with people about being afraid. Everyone is
Mm-hmm.
afraid now. I don't care if it's the CEO of a huge corporation or the person working at the grocery store. Everybody's afraid.
Yeah.
And we're human beings. And so we need to own that and be
Mm-hmm.
really upfront with folks about it. So as in, and with the understanding, as we work with people, we say the first thing that everybody has to realize is that every single person is afraid. And the first thing you need to do is help folks deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
They are not going to be able to get their work done in a great fashion, and they're not going to be able to do all these things you expect of them and think that, you know, that we'll just keep pace as we used to before the COVID-19 kicked in. The reality is you have to help your folks deal with their fear before
Mm-hmm.
anything meaningful is going to happen. And you can't avoid it, and you can't just, you know, ignore it and think they're going to be putting in their 40, 50 hours a week like they used to. They've got kids at home, they've got spouses or significant others that have lost jobs, they've got people that they know that are sick, or maybe someone in their family. They are afraid. So the first topic that folks need to talk about is this fear. And as a
Mm-hmm.
leader, being completely vulnerable with these folks and say, yeah, I'm afraid. I'm afraid too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Matt, you know, one of the things that's so interesting now too is that, you know, everybody's going with the Zoom thing like we're doing now. And um, I've talked to so many folks really in this past week in particular, where they're doing these Zoom meetings and they're getting crickets. And I believe it's because they're they're taking that, you know, everything's normal attitude, and we're just having a business meeting, and these undercurrents are there, and people, they may be looking at a screen, but in their mind they're going, okay, do we have enough groceries for this weekend?
Mm-hmm.
You know, my mom is by herself, and how am I going to help her? Or
Mm-hmm.
my kid didn't get his lesson from school completed today, and all these things are going in their heads, and yet you've got a leader up here, yak 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 and
Mm-hmm.
all this other stuff is going on, and therefore you get the crickets because the real thing hasn't been addressed.
Yeah, it's the elephant in the room, right?
It is.
And I think it's a new word in a lot of ways to bring into the workplace. Fear isn't talked
Yeah,
about
that's
often, if at all. And it's interesting to get a new sensation brought into the workplace that we need to deal with. And we're both mountain guys, and fear is real when you talk about how you're moving through the mountains. And we always talk about fears. It's healthy. It's a
yeah.
healthy, normal feeling, and it's a tool, and it's there to be used as such, right? And it's smart to be fearful in a lot of ways throughout this whole period. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, you should be afraid, right? And that said, what should you do? You should be wearing your mask and eating healthy and taking care of your body and having all this self-awareness. So I think it's just recognizing that fear is a rational feeling, and it's there to serve a purpose,
Yeah.
and to embrace it. You know, let everyone feel it, feel that feeling, embrace it, and don't let it stop you, right? And it shouldn't paralyze folks. You should just recognize it and let it be there as the tool and serve its purpose, and then continue on.
I think that's a really, really good point. I mean, two points I took away from what you just said is that it's a word that we haven't really introduced or talked about much in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it's new nomenclature for folks, and they just need to go there and throw the
Mm-hmm.
word out. I mean, you and I talk a lot about bringing love into the workplace, and how that
Yep.
freaks people out, and HR, we can't say love. Well, it's kind of the same way with fear. As leaders, we've thought that we need to be 10 feet tall and bulletproof, and we never show our fear, and we're stoic,
Mm-hmm.
and, it's not going to impact us, and take that hill. And that's just a different mindset. And that's
Mm-hmm.
so 1950s to 1980s, really. And it doesn't exist today. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, the other piece about looking at this as something that can be healthy and something that is something to be embraced is a
Mm-hmm.
really good way to look at that. Is, okay, we're afraid, all of us are afraid. How do we take that and not necessarily turn it into a positive and think that let's just flip it as, eternal
Mm-hmm.
optimists will do, but
Right.
more, how do we take the beauty of that, like we were talking about breathing in the fear and feeling it
Mm-hmm.
in your body, and then with that new awareness, do something really cool with it.
Yeah, as a leader, just let that fear inform our decisions that we make and how we're showing up and what are we doing on a daily basis. And again, it's another ingredient added to our daily life that we're moving through right now.
Yeah. And I think just recognizing the fact that it's going to be an what we perceive to be as an awkward conversation as leaders, because
Mm-hmm.
we're not used to going there,
Mm-hmm.
and embracing that. And we've always said that the growth lies in the discomfort. So this is
Yeah.
a perfect example of, you're going to have a
Mm-hmm.
level of discomfort when you talk about these things.
Yeah, I was just thinking you were saying that it's getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right?
Yeah,
So it's a practice, and you just
it
need
is.
to recognize it. So
It absolutely is. And
yeah.
along those lines too, when we talk about, and a lot of this is, certainly focused on the mindful leader piece that we're leading the charge on. It's when you're in that place of fear, go back to your breath. So
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have a tough phone call with employees. Maybe you've laid off employees. We've talked to people who laid off hundreds of employees, and that's reality. So give yourself some love, and go quiet before you have to deliver some news like this, or have some of those, crucial conversations with people, and just focus on the breath, and
Mm-hmm.
modulate your breath, and focus on your body, and how things are sitting in your body and where they're sitting in your body, and just get back to center before you do these things. Where so
Mm-hmm.
much of this, it's interesting that it's this adrenaline rush, and it's like we go into this is fight or flight almost, the amygdala part of our brain, that reptilian part of our brain, that for weeks now we've been on edge, ready for battle, and we've been in this fight or flight. And there's just, what I'm seeing now is this exhaustion, right? The
Mm-hmm.
adrenaline's wearing off, and all of a sudden it's, some of these things are coming home to roost physically or mentally with folks, and they're just wrung out. And
Mm-hmm.
so self-care is so important during this time, and it's not selfish. It's not like you're, being self-centered and taking care of yourself. That has to happen first before you can care for others.